Welcome, everyone. We got another article here. This is from bodyslam.net. The title of this RE is hashtag sorry not sorry. I don't care what men have to say about women's wrestling. This article is very, very long. It is super long and goes through quite a bit of specifically how men see wrestling throughout the years. And we're not going to go through all of this. It would be entirely too long. I do want to skip all the way down to modern day male experts of women's wrestling. This part got my attention because it's pretty funny. Okay. So again, this article is pretty long. It's on bodyslam.net if you want to see it. We're going to read this part beginning with this. I am so fortunate to see how far women's wrestling has come, both on TV and online. With it being showcased worldwide in various promotions, these women are quickly becoming undeniable. Right now, though, there's been an unfortunate pandemic in wrestling where men buy a microphone and a camera off Amazon, shoot off a couple of tweets, and suddenly some people see them as experts, when in reality, they are just another fan with a big mouth. The average male wrestling fan, regardless of the promotion or wrestler they represent and hype up the most, failed to recognize so many niche intricacies of different kinds of wrestling. Many of these self-proclaimed experts are usually only familiar with mainstream wrestling in America, but these guys love to pretend they are knowledgeable in many different facets of the business. Well, in my view, the United States is the biggest market for professional wrestling, in my view. I don't think that there's any market in the world that is bigger than the North American market for professional wrestling. It's bigger than Europe, Mexico, and Japan. And if you speak English and you listen to a podcaster that speaks English, they primarily watch American. Now, there's clearly going to be, the Wrestling Observer newsletters, their Voice of Wrestling, those kind of guys who they really get into the marigolds and the stardoms and all that kind of stuff. But most people don't. The amount of people who actually watch that kind of stuff is minimal. So she continues. Of course, the writer is female, but I didn't need to know that. I didn't need to note that, right? She continues, when these so-called journalists and insiders get different opinions or ideas different from their own fans, they love to lash out at them, even if the fan was respectful with sharing the idea or information. You may ask, Bell, why do so many men claim to support women's wrestling, but they can't accept it when they see a woman not act a certain way? Huh? Anyway, I'm sorry, you got to learn this from me, but so many men, especially younger men right now, say they don't have an issue if a woman does this or says that, but whether the man realizes it or wants to admit it or not, deep down, they still hold these sexist views towards women. Because there is no such thing as not being sexist. That's pretty much what it boils down to. You're a sexist if you do, you're sexist if you don't. There's just no way around it. People who want to smear you will smear you. So it's best to just say what you feel and not try to be politically correct about these things. So what are these sexist views? He said these sexist views they hold are shown in different ways. Sometimes they'll see a woman wrestler they deem, quote, not talented enough to hold a belt or win a match. Maybe they'll misinterpret a woman's wrestling character because it's built on a concept that he refuses to admit he doesn't understand. Lots of times, though, it's because so many men still view pro wrestling as a man's world that women simply can't understand. The majority of these male wrestling commentators share a major flaw between them. The flaw is that no matter how much they want to claim or act like they know this business, or say they have guys on the inside feeding them info or whatever, the fact of the matter is that when it comes to women's wrestling, these men will never understand the half of it because they are men. That's really what it boils down to. You're a man. You don't know anything about women's wrestling. Your penis and testicles disqualify you from having knowledge of how women's wrestling works. And wrestling is a man's world. I mean, it's a competitive sport. Men learn the ins and outs of pretty much anything that they're interested in competitively. They learn the ins and outs of it for the most part. So she continues. Men can support the women's wrestlers and watch their matches and be fans of them, of course. But to sit and judge these women, the majority of whom are constantly misinterpreted in the media by men like you, is absolute lunacy to the highest degree. What is even worse is these men who talk so much shit about women and their wrestling online in whatever context most likely have some sort of woman or female identifying person in their person. Female identifying. Female identifying. And I've always wondered how they can make such outlandish and degrading comments about these girls trying to make their way around a cutthroat business. Then turn around to maybe their girlfriend or sister or mother and look at them in the eye the next day after saying horrible stuff about women you've only ever seen online or on TV. Well, let me explain, because as a woman, you don't know fucking anything about men, right? Not every woman I meet is my mom. Not every woman I meet is my sister. I have brothers, I don't have any sisters. I have brothers. Not every man I meet is my brother. Not every man I meet is my favorite male cousin. These people are individuals. I don't know them. And if I'm looking at a TV show, which is what wrestling is, and I see somebody on that TV show performing subpar, and I say, this person sucks, I don't care whether they're male or female. They suck. And I'm pretty sure everybody listening to the sound of my voice would agree with that. It doesn't matter whether they're male or female. If she sucks, she sucks. Now, I'm not saying she sucks because she's female. There are certain elements to her not being that good because she's female. And that's just, female biology. Sometimes women are not as athletic as the men. But they have different strengths. Women typically are a little bit more charismatic than a lot of the guys. Beauty goes a long way. Big boobs go a long way. All right. Being thick goes a long way. If you thick and mid, you might get more opportunities than if you are, some kind of boring shaped, guy on one of these rosters here. But being athletic, some of them are very athletic. A lot of the Japanese girls tend to be very tiny and very, skinny, but they're very athletic. Unfortunately, being very skinny, being very small, and not really having loud personalities is a problem. Now, that's where we start talking about groups. But mostly, I'm talking about myself now. I grade talent based off of what I'm seeing on the screen. And the fact that the talent is female or not, I do grade women on a curve. Because I understand women are not as athletic. Some women are not as athletically gifted as the men. This is why when you see a Tiffany Stratton or Charlotte, she jumps off the page because you're like, oh shit, she can actually move. Oh my goodness. And then you compare her to like Liv Morgan and you're like, you look at a Gigi Dolan and you're like, a Cora Jade and you're like, oh my God, what is happening here? Like these women are not natural athletes. Some people are natural athletes. Some people are not. Now it helps that Charlotte and Tiffany Stratton have athletic backgrounds for a long time. And she talked about the Divas era, which I skipped over all of that. But a lot of the women in the Divas era, they were not athletes. They were not naturally athletic. So they were going out there kind of uncoordinated physically, hurting each other, hurting themselves. Today, these women are a little bit more naturally athletic because WWE is targeting female athletes, But then you start having the problems of personality. You start having the issue of their size. You start having the issue of promo, natural charisma, those sorts of things. And It's all level. It's all fair. But I do judge women's matches differently because I'm expecting less from a woman's match. If I held a woman's match up to the same as a men's match, I could tell you there would probably be 4 women's matches that I actually liked ever. Okay? That's just me being fair. All right? So let's get back into this because she's going to give some examples. Oh, I can't wait for this. She says, for those who don't believe me, I found some prime examples from this. Her first example is Kiana James getting a boob job and a wrestling news page, which she did not name, posting a before and after pic. And then so she quoted the tweet. I remember seeing this tweet. I don't remember who tweeted it, but I remember seeing it. And the tweet says, I thought women in wrestling wanted us to respect them for their talent in the ring and on the mic, not how big their boobs and ass are. Seems we never left the 2000s. These women will never beat the allegations of trying to look sexy for attention. So then one of the, she calls it passionate responses is, it's not allegations. These women have zero fucking talent in the ring. The only reason they have any value is the fat, pathetic marks. No one watches women's wrestling. I don't know why the times have changed, but the women haven't. Put them back in bikini contests so they can contribute to the show. I remember these tweets. I remember laughing at these tweets. So then the author says, this right here is why any opinion men feel they need to share on women's wrestling is completely invalid. I sincerely implore these men to pick up a book, watch a documentary, maybe even speak to a real life woman. In just about every single industry across the world, men like you have laid these foundations for women to be judged purely off appearance, not intelligence or talent. Well, here's the thing, sister. You will be judged the same as everybody else. Ultimate Warrior, Chris Masters, Lex Luger, all these guys had great bodies, and they got pushes because of how they look. Yes, they had to cheat and get those steroids, just like, Kiana James she ain't playing fair by going and getting boob job. But it is what it is. Nobody told her to do it. She just went and did it. I'm pretty sure nobody, held her down and made her get a boob job. She went and did it because she wanted to. This is a visual medium. How people look matters. Just like in movies, when actors gain weight or lose weight for a role, you have to look the part. Now you can say, that's not fair. I don't want women to be judged based off their appearance. That's too bad. Too bad. You're on television. Neil deGrasse Tyson hosted a TV show about space, the sun and the moon and the solar system. Fox told him he was too fat and he had to go and lose weight. Nobody stood up for him and said, that's not the body positivity. Everybody, he just went and lost weight. That's what happened. He went and lost weight so he could do the show. That was it. That's what happened. And then he had to keep the weight off. That's what happened. Physical appearance matters when you're on television. That's why they get makeup and hair. And they had to make sure their gear looks good. Because if you look like a slob on television, people will be turned away. I hate to break it to you, but this is just the facts of life. Now she's going to continue with trying to give us a history lesson. She says, in American wrestling, pathetic excuses for men like Billy Wolf, who controlled the women in the industry and only allowing what women he deemed attractive to get an opportunity to train, then having to sleep with him to win. You blame women for the actions and influences of men in society. You look at women and just expect them to act and behave a certain way. I sincerely hope that the women in your family never find out how you feel about them for their safety and sanity. Let's talk about Billy Wolf for a second, because Billy Wolf was a wrestling promoter in the 1930s and 40s, so he's dead now. All right. Now, Billy Wolf was essentially a pimp. He was like the Hugh Hefner of women's wrestling. Okay. But he literally was the only person promoting women's wrestling in the United States. Most promoters did not promote women's wrestling at all. It was only because Billy Wolf was pushing to get women on the shows that women even got on the shows. Now, yes, he had like, I think they said 30 women. He was sleeping with half of them. But then you also had a thing where Billy Wolf didn't mind lesbians. So not only was he one of the people who was getting women booked on these shows, you wouldn't have a movie like Queen of the Ring without Billy Wolf not only finding Mildred Burke, training Mildred Burke, and going to other promoters to get her booked. The fact that he was fucking her doesn't even matter. All right. And he did that for tons of women. And then if the woman was a lesbian, he still did it. People talk a lot of shit about this guy, and deservedly so. But it was the 1940s, and he was the only one booking them. And I can guarantee you anybody else was going to have that same goddamn deal. Because they thought, in their minds, nobody wanted to see women's wrestling. And so they had to be, convinced. And if you want to incentivize this guy to go out there and do it, he had to have more incentives. And part of those incentives was he was sleeping with a lot of the female talent, and a lot of them were younger than him. A lot younger. A lot younger. Some of them were not quite of age, let's say. But he was the only one getting women booked. But this is the same guy who found Mae Young and June Byers and Mildred Burke and so many other female wrestlers from the 40s and 50s. And, he actually helped find the Fabulous Moolah as well. There would not be a women's wrestling in the United States without this guy. The fact that he was, not the most upstanding citizen, in terms of our moral compass today, is you have to put that to the side. The facts are the facts. It was because of him, messaging other promoters and telling them, hey, my girls can sell tickets, especially during World War II, when all of the men were taken out of the country. And granted, if they weren't old, they were taken out of the country and sent to the war. It was Billy Wolf and women's wrestling that was actually pushing the industry forward. And now we got in 2025, some kid are like, Billy Wolf, I hate him so much. He only pushed women that were attractive, and he was having sex with them. At least he was getting them jobs. I mean, he could have just pimped them out, which, some other people did later. And that was a woman, by the way. Moving on to her second example. Her second example is Mina Shirikawa being too old. So the tweet that she wants to highlight says, she's 37. I don't think WWE is going to invest in an older wrestler that has not already been there. AEW will. And that's actually a good point. So she highlights the response that another one of the fans said, why is 37 too old for a woman but not a man? And she says, quote, a male wrestling fan who apparently is also an expert on women responds, their biology. When asked for more information, he says, quote, biological factors like menopause can affect muscle mass and endurance, making it harder for female wrestlers to maintain peak performance at older ages. But there are always exceptions to this. It's not always the case due to genetics. Okay. That's not a good answer, considering 37 is way too young to have menopause. It's way too young. And I know enough about female anatomy to know that. Okay. But what he's saying is a 37-year-old woman's body is different from a 24-year-old woman's body. It's different from a 17-year-old woman's body. This is facts. Bone structure is different. How long she's been doing this, body's just different in general. So what does this woman have to say? She says, quote, okay, so first of all, there's so many societal reasons why 37 is viewed as older for men and not for women. The biggest one is that men expect women to look young at all ages, or else they'll leave her for someone else. Is this a diary? Because this comes across like it's pretty personal. That comes across as pretty personal. She says, this is not a new concept at all. But if you like specific reasons and examples within, okay, I'll do that too. Once again, Billy Wolf unfortunately set a horrible standard for women in wrestling all the way back in the 1940s, when he essentially capped the max age for women to begin training at 24. This also influenced the Joshi world early on, as well, as many women were expected to retire at age 25 to, quote, pursue motherhood and marriage. Okay, let's pause right here. 24 is a little young to stop people from training. At the same time, though, you're talking about somebody who lived in the 1940s. Now, when the Marigold guy, I forget what his name is, the guy who got kicked out of Stardom, when he started saying that he wanted women 13 to 24, right? People was like, oh my God, he's a pedophile. He wants girls under the age of 13 or 13 years old. Like a lot of these female wrestlers in Japan, most of them are, 10-year vets and they're 15, It's weird. That's what they do. He's not having sex with them, at least I don't think so. But what he's saying is, after a certain age, it becomes difficult to train people. Hell, the NFL is not going to take a 25-year-old rookie. So it's not that different between the women and the men. Now, you could say in wrestling, they'll take a 25-year-old man, but, or a 37-year-old man. Okay, but it's not like 37-year-old women have not been brought back into wrestling or not been allowed to be in wrestling. These things are not true. You have to already be trained, though. Now, again, you're talking about different things here. You're talking about Mina Shirakawa, who's already been in the business, 37 years old, and comparing that to what the oldest age that you should take somebody in to train them. Okay, most people are not interested in 35-year-old rookies. I mean, Diamond Dallas Page had to deal with that. Again, he's not a female. You're not female identifying. Sometimes when you tell people how old you are, you're like, you're a little old to be starting this. That's like somebody trying to be a rock star at 40. Nobody's going to listen to a 40-year-old rock star and you just getting started. How often do that happen? How often do you have 40-year-old rappers? Oh, this is my first album. Well, you was born in 1986. There's no way people are gonna listen to you now. That's not gonna happen. The NBA ain't gonna take a 36-year-old rookie. The NFL runs people out by 28. They're certainly not taking a 38-year-old rookie. In athletics, being in your mid-30s is pretty fucking old. All right? And pro wrestling is athletics. It might not be 100% competition, but it is indeed athletics. And a 37-year-old woman is old. She's old. It's kind of old for a man too. Let's be fair. All right. It's old for a man too, but it's really old for a woman. Just the female body is different. Okay. Hate to break it to you. So she continues. The excuse to say that women essentially can't physically keep up in their 30s because of menopause is truly all the proof we need to know how the average male wrestling fan interacts with women in their real life. First of all, women don't really start worrying about menopause and its effects until they're about 50. This biology excuse is very old-fashioned and very common during the rise of feminism in the Victorian era. The world was changing in ways, but men didn't want women getting too much freedom. So they make phony science studies that would absolutely say outlandish things in an attempt to hold women back. A very common idea was that women's uterus was very sensitive to a magnitude of situations it had no business being affected by. One example is when hot air balloons became popular. These science studies recommend that women don't go on a hot air balloon because their uterus can't handle the change in pressure. Lastly, when seeing many male wrestlers in the business join a major promotion in their 30s and still reach incredible heights. Right off the top of my head, I think of AJ Styles debuting at the Royal Rumble, has incredibly successful stint in Japan. AJ And John Cena had an absolutely amazing rivalry in 2016 on SmackDown. And nobody questions the biology of these men. All right, let's take this piece by piece. In the early, yes, there have been all kinds of outrageous things that people have said about women. If you read a lot of books about female wrestling or women's wrestling, you'll often see that women's wrestling has at one point in time been banned in many states. It was banned in California, it was banned in New York, it was banned in New Jersey, and quite often when it was banned because women wanted it banned. And they came up with all kinds of excuses. Oh, these women are not real athletes. They're just being put in titillating positions for men. You know, the old, the male gaze excuse. That's what they call it now. But back then they called it titillation, right? You're titillating the male audience. It's bad for young boys, for women to be out there. And it's bad for the women. And they will say things about women's bodies not being able to handle the pressure of wrestling. And, you know, it's a terrible thing for mothers and all this kind of stuff, right? A lot of it was other women who wanted it banned, not necessarily the patriarchy. You know, the patriarchy was there too. The patriarchy is what they were appealing to get it banned. But a lot of the crazy stuff that women can't really handle pressure, they shouldn't be in these super competitive situations, all this kind of stuff, a lot of that came from women. Okay. And secondly, AJ Styles is a freak of nature. He's a freak of nature. There's a lot of people that when they join an organization, man, they are absolutely washed. At 35 or 36 or something like that, they are washed. It happens. I've seen it happen. You know, look at Bret Hart when he went to WCW. He's probably like, 40? He was washed in WCW. Dead meat. It happens. You know, not all men are the same. You picked AJ Styles, who happens to be one of the best conditioned athletes on the planet Earth. And I don't know if Mina Shirikawa is the same physical specimen as AJ Styles. I'm just not sure about that. So her third, is this the third example? Yeah, the third example is Sasha Banks going off on male podcasters about her leaving WWE. So the tweet she wants to highlight is, when I left WWE, the goal was to elevate women's wrestling and create more global opportunities. Many of the old guy podcasters mocked me for that. And then Mercedes says something stupid every week. Every week she says something stupid. People just generally don't like her. All right. Anything that comes out of this is going to be tainted by the fact that people don't like her. Let's get that right before we get into the rest of this article or whatever the response is going to be. Understand, people don't like Mercedes Banks. They don't like her. Sasha Monet, people do not like her. Right? So they're going to attack her because they don't like her. All right? So one of the fans says, this fucking clown can't even face the reality that she created all by herself. To be this much in denial just shows how out of touch she truly is. She is by far the worst fucking thing that has happened to women's wrestling in the last 5 years. See, that's the kind of stuff people say when they don't like you. There's no way she's the worst thing that happened to women's wrestling in the last 5 years. There's just no way. The tooth and nail match happened. She's not nearly that bad. All right. So the writer, the author of the article says, as a fellow Boston girl myself, I have loved and supported Sasha Mercedes since NXT. The way she has been treated by fans is crazy to me sometimes. Ever since NXT with Bayley, Charlotte, and Becky, this woman has been putting women's wrestling on the map, and she has continued to have it rise to higher levels since leaving WWE. Whether these men want to admit it or not, the fact of the matter is wherever Mercedes goes, the rest of the wrestling world isn't far behind her. What? Oh, this is a Stan account now. Oh, you standing now. I don't like that. I don't like this Stan shit. I don't like that. It sucks. She continues by saying, this woman has changed the conversation about women's wrestling, but so many of you men discredit her for petty reasons, such as her skin color or her appearance. I remember so many people calling Mercedes horseface during her time in WWE, and that was just the tame name calling, unfortunately. You all know that Mercedes is the woman when it comes to this business, and it's been that way for a long time. Ever since she started gaining traction in her start with WWE, you all put her under this microscope and just observed for anything you can do to discredit this woman. As a matter of time of writing this piece, Mercedes currently has 4 women's championships, and it's not necessarily about the amount of championships, right? It's the impact that she makes with them. Mercedes has proved multiple times over that she isn't afraid to put in the work, and that isn't afraid to stretch the people's perspective of this sport. I'm not listening to this stand shit no more. Enough standing. No more standing. You're skipping the rest of her stand. And it's more. It's like 3 more paragraphs of her standing Mercedes. It's like somebody pushed a button and all of a sudden bullshit. I mean, there was already a lot of bullshit on this page, but it's like more started coming out. She started regurgitating all this garbage. Mercedes, she's changing women's wrestling. No conversation about how. How is she changing women's wrestling? She threw a fit and quit the WWE because she didn't want to lose matches. Now she's got to have her own personal writer and her own, personal segments and all this bullshit in order to make her and her cult feel better. Elevating women's wrestling. Get the fuck out of here. This woman says, quote, as I cloud out this lengthy, information-packed editorial, I want the men reading this to think about this before responding to me online. I want you to think about the woman who's very important to you in your life, whether it be your mother, sister, aunt, friend, etc. I want you to think on what they've told you about their past, maybe a past job opportunity, maybe a moment from her days in school, or just how she passed the time and what her general interests are. I want you to compare her personal experience with what's going on in the world and in her general vicinity to maybe get an idea of how this impactful experience in her life could be viewed differently by society and those around her. Why? I just want to watch a wrestling show, and if somebody sucks, I'm going to be able to say that they suck. Why do I have to go through all this? Why do I have to have homework to say somebody sucks? So she closes out by saying, the point of this article isn't to demonize men or put them all in one category. Each era I spoke on for women in wrestling came with their own challenges and hurdles, and how some male wrestling fans reacted to women in wrestling during these eras is very distasteful. When fans of wrestling look at talents through TV screens, I think it's very easy to forget that at the end of the day, when the performance is over, they are humans, just like us. Especially in the world of women's wrestling, where women have historically been viewed as separate to their male workers. From the days of Mildred Burke in the 1930s to today's women wrestling stars, so many of these women have jumped over hurdles they shouldn't have to just to get an ounce of the recognition a man gets. When the day comes where we are truly seen and respected as equal, then maybe I'll listen to what a man has to say about a woman. Here's the issue that this person continues to miss. Now, when she started her article, she kind of started it in the 90s, but of course the Attitude Era and, Sable being naked, mud matches, bra and panties, all that stuff, right? But the heavy emphasis on people like Billy Wolf, I was hoping that, this person would be kind of smart because, again, the reason that there was women's wrestling in the first place is because there were promoters, specifically a promoter that was a male, that went to his other fellow male promoters and convinced them that women on their shows could boost business. And he would keep newspaper clippings to prove it. My girls main evented this show in the middle of nowhere, Alabama, and they got 11,000 people to come to the arena. And that would, convince the promoter in Kentucky to let women be on his show. That was business. Nobody had to be nagged. There was no bullshit. And guess what? Most of the fans were male. And they were fine with it. The sports writers who were writing positive articles about Mildred Burke and all of her ilk were male. Now, there were some female sports writers, very few. This is the 1930s, 1940s. But the fans responded well to women being in that position. And the men liked it. And the women liked it. There was a lot of female fans too. They were inspired by the Mildred Burkes. There were half a dozen women that were inspired by Mildred Burke. Two of them being June Byers, who's going to be the chief villain of the Queen of the Ring movie, and Lillian Ellison, aka the Fabulous Moolah, who also was inspired by Mildred Burke. Both of whom were taken to the wrestling matches by an older male figure, one being an uncle, another one being her father. Took her to the matches and saw a woman. And she was like, oh shit, women can wrestle? I want to do that. Now, you wouldn't get that if there wasn't for somebody putting in the effort. And that somebody was a man. He wasn't the best man in the world. Human beings are flawed. They have all kinds of flaws. All right. But it was a male promoter that was willing to promote women's wrestling, travel across the country from coast to coast to promote women's wrestling, and even into Canada and Mexico to promote women's wrestling. There were male fans that were coming out in droves to see women's wrestling that made the momentum continue over time. There were male sports writers who were writing great articles in nationally publicated magazines featuring female wrestlers that was making them famous. You cannot tell me that if you're not good at your job, that men won't put you over. Because they were doing it in the 1930s and in the 1940s. The idea that you don't want to hear what no man has to think. If it had to be women to put over other women, there wouldn't be any fucking women's wrestling right now. There wouldn't be any. In fact, if it wasn't Vince McMahon who actually invested in a women's division in the 1980s so that women could be featured on the very first WrestleMania, one of the very first episodes of Saturday Night's Main Event was built around an angle involving women. You could say whatever you want to about Vince McMahon today in 2025. But in 1983, 1984, he was ahead of the curve. Almost nobody else had a long-running women's division. Almost nobody had that. Okay? And he had to spend money to buy that belt from the Fabulous Moolah in order to get her to give it to other people. Okay? So he had to spend his own cash. And he maintained that division for a few years. And then it petered out. And then he brought it back. And it petered out again. But things over time means that there had to be some sort of male investment. Now, one of the huge mistakes that people think is that the women's division we have in WWE today is because of TNA. Oh, the Knockouts division. Yeah, if it wasn't for Awesome Kong and Gail Kim, you wouldn't have a women's revolution in WWE. They don't give a fuck about that. You think Vince McMahon cared about that? He didn't give a fuck about that. And then also, it was a big issue because if you actually looked at TNA at the time, the only thing that was drawing money was the beautiful people. Angelina Love and that other one, Velvet Sky. But have you seen Angelina Love and Velvet Sky? They were two gigantically breasted bimbos, no different than what you would have saw in the Divas era. No different. They sold sex, just like you would have seen in the Divas era. Their entire entrance is them wiggling their butts. And they want to tell you that this is This is what changed everything. Fucking Velvet Sky and Angelina. No. Brooke Tessmacher. God damn, she had huge tits. All these chicks running around with huge tits in TNA. You talking about, oh, they changed women's wrestling. No, they did not. Vince McMahon didn't give a fuck about that. What changed it? What changed the Divas era to the women's revolution was Total Divas. It was Total Divas. I know people don't want to give it any credit, but it was Total Divas. From Total Divas, the WWE female audience cracked 40% for the first time ever. Now, once that happened, they had a certain level of influence on the product. This is where you got Give Divas a Chance and all that stuff. They actually started changing how they recruited the women, how they trained them, and that led to the women's revolution. But it was not, the fans forced it, kind of, but it was the Diva stands that forced it. Because the Diva stands are the ones who wanted these matches to be longer and wanted to feature these women more. Nobody else did. And some of the Diva stands are male. Some of them are male. And then a lot of these women, they were upset because they were getting roasted by podcasters and bloggers who were talking about how terrible they were every single week. And it wasn't their fault. A lot of them were models. They were not trained athletes. They were not trained professional wrestlers. It was not their fault. But it was what it was. They were looking at what was on the screen and judging what was on the screen. When WWE goes out there and they find some kind of jacked big guy who is a bodybuilder or a strong man and have no wrestling experience, no athletic background whatsoever, and he goes out there and he sucks, I guarantee you he will get the exact same response as a woman who was just beautiful but no athletic background. How can I know this? Because that's what they did to Braun Strowman. Braun Strowman was a gigantic jack dude with no wrestling experience whatsoever. And Vince just threw him on TV because he was 6'8" and muscular. And he went out there and people talked about how terrible he was every single week. And he did it again with Omos. Every single week, people were talking about how terrible Omos is. He's a big lumbering idiot. He's a big lumbering giant. Ain't nothing good about him. He sucks, blah, blah, blah. These were men, though. We're supposed to treat women with kid gloves, right? Oh, we're supposed to treat women like, you're my sister. No. We're judging everybody fairly. The Ultimate Warrior, people said the Ultimate Warrior sucked because he was a big muscular guy. They didn't understand his promos. They didn't like his matches. And I'm talking about, dirt sheet folks. They said the same thing about Sable. She looks great, but she can't work for shit. To me, that's equal. Except Sable couldn't talk either, and Warrior could. Okay, Warrior could at least cut a promo. His promos were actually good, by the way. Sable, no. She sounded wooden, and she's just a pretty girl with no personality and a bad attitude. Warrior, big muscular jacked guy, bad attitude. Right? People look at him the exact same way. But when you are brutal on the women, somehow you get extra mean guy points. Or you're an extra mean guy because you are brutal to a woman. Instead of saying, hey, would you talk about a man that way? Yes. And they talked about Bill Goldberg the same way. He was a football player, but he wasn't a polished professional wrestler. And people said he sucked because he was not a polished professional wrestler. You must have missed all that. Or it didn't fit your narrative. So that's why you didn't mention it. But I mentioned it because I'm honest. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later.